In November of 2020, archaeologists in Egypt uncovered an ancient necropolis south of Cairo, containing roughly 100 intact wooden coffins dating back more than 2,500 years. Inside the coffins were preserved mummies, wrapped in bright hieroglyphic-adorned coverings. Just months later, in April of 2021, archaeologists working in the DRACULA province, near where the Nile River drains into the Mediterranean, found an even older grave site, this one containing over 100 tombs dating back 5,000 years, to the times of Egypt's pharaohs. Both of these discoveries were met with much interest and celebration in the archaeological community since, as with previous discoveries of ancient Egyptian tombs and artifacts, they promised enhanced understanding and study of the region's past culture. But outside of the archaeological community, they were met with something else. Numerous memes, jokes, and in some cases even serious admonishments, recommending the archaeologists leave well enough alone and resist disturbing the sites. After all, these warnings would say, why tempt a mummy's curse? The popular myth of a mummy's curse has long persisted in pop culture, not only because of the plethora of supernatural mummy stories found in literature and comic books, or the abundance of mummy horror films from studios like Universal and Hammer, but also most likely because of what many consider to be a true example of the real deal. King Tut's curse, also known as the Curse of the Pharaoh, refers to the 1922 excavation of the tomb of Tutankhamun, Egypt's boy king who lived roughly between 1343 to 1323 BC and had ascended to the throne as pharaoh at the age of 10. It has long been believed that of the numerous men who discovered and opened the tomb, and ultimately moved the boy king's body, sarcophagus, and the various treasures the tomb contained, many of them supposedly died of mysterious causes not long after. The most notable example is George Edward Stanhope Molyneux Herbert, a British aristocrat and Egyptologist who helped finance the expedition, and who died under a year after the tomb was opened. Herbert's death, and stories of others like it, were enough to convince many these men had doomed themselves by desecrating the tomb, and the idea of a curse was even promoted by famed Sherlock Holmes author Arthur Conan Doyle. The only issue is, there is very little evidence to support this theory of a real-life curse. While it's often said that Herbert's death was mysterious, the truth is he was already known to be in quite poor health before his trip to Egypt, and in fact died from a blood disease caused by mosquitoes. Tragic, yes, but not necessarily uncommon at the time. While it's true a few others did die not long after their involvement with uncovering the tomb, this is actually just to somewhat be expected when discussing how many people, of various ages and levels of health, were involved. The law of averages suggests some will die sooner than others. And it must be said that plenty of the men seem to be unaffected by the supposed curse. For instance, Howard Carter, the man who headed the excavation, discovered and physically opened the tomb, and actually removed Tutankhamun's body, lived for another 16 years following those actions. Sergeant Richard Adamson, who guarded the burial chamber almost round the clock for 7 years, lived for another 60 years, dying in 1982. All told, the average age of death for those involved with the excavation was 73, actually 1 year higher than the general average for persons of that period and social class. So why did the notion of a curse take such strong hold on the public then? It's most likely because of Howard Carter himself, who exploited the legends of cursed tombs in order to keep the press and other explorers at bay while he and his team worked on excavating King Tut's tomb. Carter put out a story that a curse had been placed on anyone who dared to violate the rest of the boy king, and plenty of gullible people bought it. Including, yes, even Sherlock Holmes' creator. Though, it's important to remember, Conan Doyle also wrote a book alleging that fairies were real. Even if the curse of King Tut's tomb wasn't necessarily true, it was still a boon to all those writers and filmmakers wishing to scare audiences with mummy stories, as the notion of ancient curses would soon become a cornerstone of tales of this particular monster. But, before we get too sure there's no such thing as a mummy's curse, perhaps we should ask the men and women assigned to spearhead a big new project at Universal in 2017, the Dark Universe. For while they may have survived the experience, their future plans, and in some cases even some of their jobs, did not. The year is 2017, and Universal Pictures are ready to take one more shot at launching a new shared cinematic universe of gods and monsters, with The Mummy.
4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
welcome once again to Failure to Franchise, the show dedicated to some of Hollywood's most infamous mistakes, missteps, and misfires. This is Trev.
And I'm Chris, here to discuss this doozy of a movie that's cruising for a bruising.
I like it. I like it.
Yep.
This is a big one for us. This is our Halloween spectacular. It's the end of our Curse of the Dark Universe. And that's very good. That's going to be very titular for us in this case. Mm-hmm. Today we are looking at, I'd say, one of the most infamous bombs in recent history. Wouldn't you agree? I think when we started talking about doing this show, this was obviously in the forefront of our mind. This is for many reasons, which we'll talk about, because this isn't just a failure of a singular franchise. This is much, much bigger than that, and that is 2017's The Mummy. So, Chris, why don't you tell us a little bit about this already infamous film?
So it is directed by Alex Kurtzman, most known for the Star Trek new stuff, as Trev likes to call him, a notorious hack.
This fucking guy. I got a lot to say about Alex Kurtzman, so strap in, people.
But this is his second directorial feature. This is where I usually list the writers, Trev. So get ready for this list, okay? Uh-huh. We have Chris McQuarrie, known for Edge of Tomorrow, Jack Reacher, Mission Impossible 6, 7, and 8. So you can kind of see a Tom Cruise through line there. Mm-hmm. John Spates, he co-wrote Prometheus, Doctor Strange, and the upcoming Dune. Then we have four more writers. Alex Kurtzman, like we just said, in charge of New Trek, Transformers 1 and 2, Cowboys and Aliens. David Koepp, most known for Jurassic Park, Mission Impossible, Panic Room, Spider-Man. Jenny Lumet, she is involved with the New Trek under Kurtzman. And then Dylan Kussman, mostly just a TV actor, and he was in Jack Reacher at a point, so I have no idea why he's included. But this is what's interesting. The last four names I just read out, they were not revealed to having writing credits until days before this film released. So that tells you something off the bat.
And in fact, there's also an uncredited writer who also is kind of known, and that is Roberto Orci, which is Kurtzman's regular kind of writing partner.
Yes.
There's also a lot of indications that he was involved with this as well. So yes, a real many cooks in the kitchen scenario here.
Yes.
Chris, why don't you tell us about the budget and the box office?
It was made for $195 million. Domestically, it made $80 million. And worldwide, it made $409 million. So this movie needed to gross at least $450 million to break even, and actually ended up losing the studio there's estimates between $60 and $100 million. So this is one of those bombs we talk about that is a financial disaster. Definitely a critical one as well, which we'll get into. But this one kind of rings all the bells for our podcast here.
Yeah, this is one of those ones where people can sometimes look at that and say, like, 195 and it made 410. I guess it's okay, right? And then you forget how much money they sank into advertising and marketing for this one, and just the kind of embarrassment of it, as we're going to talk about, it needing to do well enough to justify not only sequels to this film, but spin-offs and like an entire universe. And that's why the overall performance of this was so kind of embarrassing for them. Chris, do you also happen to know what this movie was rated?
Yeah, it is PG-13.
See, that's surprising to me that it got a PG-13 since there's so much cursing in the movie. Because it's a mummy movie, so there's a bunch of curses.
Oh, no. I can already sense what's going to happen for the next hour and a half.
No. It's gonna be fine. It's gonna be fine. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about like the long road to this film, and in particular, I guess we want to start a little bit by talking about the dark universe in general. This idea of this kind of shared cinematic universe starring all the Universal monsters. This is something we named our entire 2-month event that we were looking at Van Helsing, The Wolfman, and Dracula Untold. This is something we've been talking about. It's obviously something Universal's been thinking about for a while at this point. Dracula Untold was, during production of the film, they started to think about that as a potential starting point for this kind of shared universe, to the point, as we mentioned last time, they added in that little final scene to kind of set it up. And then people didn't like it, so they instantly decanonized it and said, no, we're just kidding. That's not going to be the start of our dark universe. And so instead we roll into The Mummy as the dark universe. So this is a clear, obvious, pretty bald-faced attempt to just replicate the MCU, which obviously like every studio is trying to do at this point, right? So WB obviously for the first time saw the potential of actually making DC movies that were linked together. And every other studio is like kind of looking at their properties. And Universal, to their credit, remembers that they had the original shared universe, the first ever cinematic universe that crossed many franchises, and that is the Universal Monsters. So I suppose it makes a certain kind of sense to say, well, I guess maybe that can be our MCU. The problem, as we're going to talk about here, is the entire approach to it. And that was an approach where they couldn't seem to figure out if they wanted it scary or if they wanted it to be kind of more in line with the adventure kind of aspect of the Stephen Sommers, Brendan Fraser mummy films. It just seemed very, very misguided from the very beginning, where they didn't quite know what they're doing, and we're certainly going to see that illustrated with looking at this movie today. So the very fact this movie starts now with the actual Dark Universe logo, it just makes it like hilarious in retrospect that
Huge.
They were so confident and how quickly it all fell apart on them.
It's funny too seeing a logo like it's a classic cart before horse,
Yeah.
and it's we'll get into it when we talk about the movie, but seeing that logo flash across my screen while I watched it on Netflix, it's just cemented. You this movie will never shake the memory of it being a complete utter disaster.
Yeah. So I guess so we're obviously going to talk a lot about like the development of this film and its connection to the Dark Universe and how it fell apart. But I guess we should talk about why they decided to run with The Mummy as the first one, once Dracula Untold fell on its face, obviously. Mm-hmm. And it's ultimately not too surprising to me that Universal thought like, well, let's start with The Mummy for a couple reasons. First of all, for them in recent memory, it was the only kind of Universal monster property that had a recent success, and that is the Stephen Sommers Mummy series. We have the first two, The Mummy and The Mummy Returns, which are both gigantic hits. Even the third Mummy film, it wasn't a huge hit, but I think it did, fairly well for them to a certain degree for what the expectations were. So looking back on that, I'm sure there's probably people within Universal who wanted to keep that franchise going, but I think after, the more lackluster reaction to the third film and Stephen Sommers not necessarily coming back and Rachel Weisz not being interested anymore, that version obviously just kind of petered out. But still, unlike Dracula Untold, unlike The Wolfman, unlike these other attempts, The Mummy had been a proven property recently. So that's one element of saying, well, let's try that again. We know that can work, and we know it's worked fairly recently where people like this as a property. But beyond that, Universal's just had this hard-on for trying to bring the Mummy back. And it's also like one of their classic, monsters. The original 1932 film, of course, one of the original Universal monster films. I was just alluding to this shared universe from the 30s and 40s. And the Mummy, of course, one of the signature films and monsters from that entire, original franchise for them. Chris, just really briefly, I know we talked in our Dracula Untold episode about your experience with, Dracula films, and it was kind of sparse. I am just curious, what about The Mummy? I know you're a big fan of the Sommers movies, as am I, but what about The Mummy as just an overall character and, the original movies? Do you have any experience with it, or what are your feelings on that as just a monster in general?
I really just have the knowledge from the Sommers films. That's my go-to. I love those movies. They're fun as hell. Like we've said in a previous episode that they're one of the great, especially the first one is one of the great blockbusters. So I think it's just it's a rockin' time, and I do love that adventure feel to it. Also has a lot of horrific stuff in it as well. If people go back and watch the first Mummy movie, it gets I don't want to say scary. That's not what I mean, but it's like it gets a little fucked up. Imhotep's a really good, actually a great villain, I would say.
It has a good balance of that kind of adventure and like light horror.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But beyond, so obviously that's not, like Universal, as we were saying, that's not Universal's like first kind of go with the Mummy. So that's why I was kind of curious because, so we go back to that 32 film, and that film itself has a number of sequels. I guess I should just quickly say I'm not the biggest fan of the Mummy as like a Universal monster property in terms of like the original Universal monster series. The Mummy, the 32 film, is like to me one of the lesser films in that whole cycle. It's actually kind of boring, I think. And for a film that's only about 72 minutes, it's just not very engaging. It's not very exciting. I know it has a very classic Boris Karloff performance, and we all love Boris Karloff, but I mean, that's not the one you point to. Obviously you're going to look at Frankenstein for the go-to Boris Karloff for me. And I just find The Mummy to be a little, I'm just kind of more iffy on it. I will say I slightly enjoy the sequels a bit more. So there's a number of sequels starting with The Mummy's Hand in 1940, and that's followed by The Mummy's Tomb in 42, The Mummy's Ghost in 44, and The Mummy's Curse in 44, also in 44. And then eventually we also get Abbott and Costello Meet the Mummy in 55. So the sequels actually drop the Imhotep character that Karloff played in the original, and we move into a new mummy called Karis. So Karis is the mummy throughout the sequels. And the sequels are much stupider, but also more entertaining. They're kind of like early slasher films, essentially. Okay. It's really just watching the mummy like stalk around and murder people. And in fact, when Hammer, the studio, the British studio that, of course, through the 50s and 60s would kind of dip their own toes into remaking the Universal monster properties or doing their own spins on them, when they do their Mummy series, it's very much more based on the Karis films from Universal. They completely ignore like the entire original. They ignore the Imhotep thing. So the Stephen Sommers film in 1999 really is kind of the first reemergence of Imhotep as the villain. And some of those elements as well.
I actually had no idea that was taken directly from the original incarnation. So that's
I mean, it's pretty different. And I'll give you like the ultimate example. Like they're doing the thing in the Sommers film of paying tribute, but obviously putting their own spin on it. And the ultimate example of that is in the original 32 film. So Imhotep is the mummy who is resurrected, and then he spends most of the film, like everyone has this image of the mummy as this creature, this slow-moving creature wrapped in bandages, and that is what Karis is throughout most of his sequels. But in the Mummy, we only see Imhotep like that very, very briefly. He then kind of, poses as a living person for most of the film, and actually the name he takes on in his like, hey, I'm just a regular human, guys, is Ardeth Bey. And of course, they reappropriate the name Ardeth Bey for Oded Fehr's heroic character in the Stephen Sommers series.
Oh, shit.
So that's what I mean, right? How that's like a little tribute to that, but obviously a much different character. So, this
is why I come to this podcast. I get little history lessons from my friend, and
it's what I'm here for. Look, I've spent so much of my life not learning important things, and instead learning about the Mummy movies, which I'm not even a huge fan of. But like that road from like the original 40s films to the Stephen Sommers one, even that road is pretty crazy. So Universal, as I was just saying, they were obsessed for a long time with trying to get the Mummy going again as a property. And it's just really interesting. I just wanted to briefly touch on some of the names you see involved in that trek. So in the late 80s, we actually have horror master Clive Barker pitch a version to Universal. He was working on this with Mick Garris, who's another well-known name in horror circles, kind of like the guy who directed the Stand miniseries and the Shining miniseries, kind of known for his work with Stephen King. So they pitched a version to Universal that at the time, it sounds like it would have been very interesting. Sounds like it would have been very dark, very kind of like sexual, as is usually the case with Clive Barker material. But as Barker has recently said and talked about, it also has a transgender take on the material, which no studio, including Universal, at the time wanted to touch. In '89, that was not a version of the property they were looking to get into.
Hell, they barely want to touch. They barely want to do that nowadays.
That's true. Yeah, I don't even. I'm not sure you could make it today, honestly. And that was going to be like a lower budget version. But even with that low budget, his story ideas just kind of turned off the studio. He's actually said. Nobody in America, we were told, would accept such a ridiculous premise when he pitched his idea. So with Clive Barker out, the first director who kind of steps in is Joe Dante of Gremlins fame and The Howling fame. So he comes in and he works with Alan Ormsby and John Sayles, and it says that he was imagining a bigger budget version of The Mummy with Daniel Day-Lewis in the lead. He described his version as being contemporary, satirical, and romantic, adding that it was more like the Karloff picture, where the title character is the mummy at the beginning, and then he has an alter ego. So Steven Spielberg apparently read this script, really liked it. So he kind of gave like his approval to it. I don't know why that matters, but obviously Spielberg has some clout, right? Especially at Universal.
Yeah.
And so they thought it was going to go, but apparently the budget was just too high, which is kind of ironic.
Do you think it was too high because Daniel Day-Lewis ordered a shipment, a crate size of bandages that he just like walked around for 6 months prior and had to live as the mummy?
Well, I think it's probably more like he was like he asked him to actually mummify him for 6 months.
Oh, right,
so he could really get into character. Yeah, and that was going to like just set off production. Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah.
So that Universal decided that one was too high a budget, which is funny because they ended up ultimately making a blockbuster, right? But with that version set aside, they actually then for a moment are talking to George Romero. George Romero completes a draft of The Mummy in 1994. He describes his version as being creepier and more romantic than the eventual remake we get. He's talked a little bit about it. His version very much did, again, focus on Imhotep, and just kind of like this more kind of, slightly straightforward remake of the original, but with obviously some Romero kind of tweaks to it. Mm-hmm. As is often the case with too many George Romero projects, that does not go forward. So that's the Universal pulls the plug on that one. They then talk to Wes Craven. Wes Craven is approached, but he turns it down. And again, and it sounds like it also comes back around to Mick Garris briefly. So when we talked about the Wolfman a few episodes ago, I talked about the odd decision to not like kind of bring that property to any kind of known horror directors. This is quite the opposite here, right? Where throughout the 90s, 80s and 90s, Universal almost made mummy movies with Clive Barker, Mick Garris, Joe Dante, George Romero, and Wes Craven.
Wow.
This is a property that was attracting a lot of that's a real murderer's row, no pun intended, of horror talent. So it's actually kind of interesting that we eventually get Stephen Sommers to do it, since he was kind of, he'd done Deep Rising, which has horror elements, but it's obviously more of like a fun, big monster movie. But ultimately it turns out to be, I'm not going to poo-poo that decision because we get two awesome blockbusters.
Yeah. That maybe even puts a little bit more context on our conversation in The Wolfman about why they didn't go to these people. Like, but potentially they would maybe they look back at their past being like, fuck, none of these guys worked out, and maybe it like pigeonholed them a little bit. I don't know. Like, do you think there's any credence to that? I don't know.
It could either be that, or it could be like you ask yourself again, why didn't these things work out? And you say, well, when you bring in established horror names like Barker, Romero, Craven, Dante, these are guys who probably don't suffer fools lightly and come in with very particular ideas.
Right.
And like they're horror masters for a reason. And for many of them, their bona fides came from the independent circuit when they were able to kind of call their own shots, and they don't necessarily work well in a studio setting. We've certainly seen that with Romero. We know Craven had his issues, like even just working for like the Weinsteins and the Scream films. Clive Barker has had like just such a tough go of it in Hollywood. So yeah, I think they probably didn't want to play too nice with Universal. And whereas Stephen Sommers, he's a little bit, no offense to the guy, he strikes me as probably more a go along to get along kind of person who's going to deliver the sort of film Universal wanted. And that'll certainly apply to the movie we're going to talk about today in terms of, where we go with that filmmaker. So I just wanted to briefly hit on that because I just thought it's interesting to just provide a little context of how Universal has just always looked at this as a property to kind of try and get going. And so they must have just thought they hit pay dirt with those Stephen Sommers films. So I'm not surprised that they tried to come back around to it for their first official Dark Universe entry.
So let's flash forward to 2012, where after the Wolfman bombs, they realize, what should we do? Well, you know what? Yes, let's do The Mummy. And it actually goes through multiple directors and actually somewhat horror-ish directors in a weird way, because Len Wiseman comes into the fold, the guy in charge of the Underworld series. He leaves the project in 2013. And then they looked at Andy Muschietti in 2014, who actually goes on to direct the It films. So, interesting.
Yeah, I look at that and I look at that and I think, like, I don't know. I like the Underworld films. I'm not sure I want to see a Len Wiseman Mummy.
Right.
When I hear Andy Muschietti, I'm like, that's interesting. I would love to see a Mummy film from the guy who made the first It movie. I'm not sure I want to see a Mummy film from the guy who made the second It movie, which is ultimately the same director. So I guess you never know with him, is my point. But but it is cool that his name was kind of already in the mix, and that's certainly maybe a little bit more interesting than what we got.
But what does get the wheels in motion is our man of the hour, Trev.
Our boy.
We've said it multiple times on this podcast, but we yell it in the streets. That the last great movie star, true movie star in Hollywood, the great Tom Cruise.
Yes, no Tom Cruise slander on this podcast. Yes, we know he's part of an evil cult and maybe doing terrible things, but
like, who cares?
His movies are fun.
Yeah, he always gives it his all, even in this, which we will get to, for better and for worse. But we talked about this actually in our Van Helsing episode. Well, that movie came out in 2004, and there was talk Tom Cruise would play the titular character. So that fell apart.
In a reboot of Van Helsing.
Sorry, in a reboot of Van Helsing.
Yeah.
So he was in the talks, been in talks with Universal for quite some time. So then the Mummy is being brought up, and Tom Cruise, raises his hand, and he's like, get me involved. So he joins in November of 2015.
Yeah, and Tom Cruise is known as, like, besides being, the last movie star and kind of shepherding his own projects, he's known as being a big, like, cinema aficionado himself, a big movie fan. He often talks about how he watches a movie a day, right? Mm-hmm. And he strikes me as someone who's probably a fan of those old Universal monster movies. So the fact that he wanted to play Van Helsing, and that fell apart, and so he sees this whole Dark Universe thing starting, and right away he's like, what if I can get my fingers in that, right? Yep. It just looks like this to him was, like, kind of destiny foretold, right? He didn't get to play Van Helsing, so he'll come in and do this instead. To as we will say, pluses and minuses in overall. But I think it's cool. It's probably that. It's probably also he is also a very business-minded individual.
Huge.
He's often thinking about, especially in like kind of the second stage of his career, it's very much about what's going to make the biggest, what's going to be the biggest hit, what's going to please the audiences the most. He's a guy who pays so much attention to the industry. He sees the way the winds are blowing now. He sees the success of the MCU. He's not going to join the MCU because that's a little bit too like that's too driven by Kevin Feige, right? Yes. But he sees the potential of being part of a shared universe, I'm sure. And he knows if he can get in at the ground level, then it can be kind of his shared universe. Literally
the words I was about to say, the ground level. Yeah. And would you consider Tom Cruise at this point a mega producer?
I think so. I mean, he doesn't produce too much, right? Because he only produces his own stuff, and it's not like he's super prolific. But yeah, I think he's a super producer in the sense of where if you're getting involved with a Tom Cruise film, it's going to be all his way or the highway.
Yeah.
He's very, very involved in every aspect of the production, which carries over into this film. He's got very particular ideas of what a Tom Cruise movie should be. He knows Tom Cruise is an industry now.
Yes.
He's him and Will Smith are very alike in that degree. These are guys who they will build their project from the ground up and make sure it fits the image that they have cultivated for themselves. And so, yeah, in that aspect, I would definitely consider him like a super producer. And that goes into him now, like, only working with certain writers. And you talked about, this writer who just happened to be an actor in Jack Reacher. That's probably a guy he met on the set of Jack Reacher. That guy probably was like, yeah, I do some writing. And Tom Cruise is like, oh, well, I can use this guy, right? Because he's a guy that's going to be totally under my thumb. I can bring him in, and he can write to my specifications. And, of course, I feel like Christopher McQuarrie has either been the writer or a script polisher on, like, every Tom Cruise project of the past, like, 10 or so years, right? So he's just got this. He's got these people now that are his people, and they follow him around, and that's like his crew.
Totally. And he definitely understands what sells, what a 4-quadrant film is, what you need to do to get asses in seats. And he's like I said before, he gives it all to the audience. And I've seen him in person on one occasion. I think were we at the same Comic-Con that year where they gave him like an award or something. I know he came out on stage, and the way he speaks and the way he talks to the audience is very meaningful. It's very powerful, you might say. Like because he's very he was saying something like this is the reason I do it is purely for you guys. Like I will do anything for the audience. And I mean, and that's evident in his his recent Mission Impossible movies, like strapping himself to a fucking plane. He's about to bike over a gorge, or he did already for the new Mission Impossible. And like bungee jump, like the guy's a nutcase, as we said, and I mean he might actually die making a movie one day, but that guy is dedicated, and maybe that's the word I want to use for him. Like no matter what you say about the guy, no matter what you think about the guy, he's dedicated to the craft. He's dedicated to movie making. And it's really respectable, and I like that he does it. I've heard so many anecdotes through podcasts over the years of if Tom Cruise is talking to you on set or he's asking you questions about your life, he wants to know, and he'll remember it years later, and he'll meet the same people on a different set, and they'll be like, "Oh, so how's your mother?" And
I've heard that too, and I've heard people address that in a kind of a cynical way, and I just want to quickly address that because I get what they're saying, right? So people talk about how he's kind of this guy who understands the importance of image and the importance of like schmoozing, and he's certainly had times in his career where like that's things have gone bad for him in that regard. Of course, the entire couch jumping incident, which took him a while to kind of recover from, and the kind of more revelations about Scientology and things like that. So yeah, I've heard people talk about that idea that he's a guy who, as you just said, like on a set, he'll memorize the names of all the crew, right? The caterers, the everybody in wardrobe, everybody in makeup, and like remember everything about these details. He'll go to like crew members' birthday parties during production. He'll remember people on the red carpet, like the same kind of interviewers, and remember little details about them. And people point out that there might be a level of like cynicism to that's all calculated by him, and I don't disagree. My counterpoint to that is like, even if it's calculated, even if it's someone cynical, isn't that still better than just being an asshole?
Exactly.
Like, right? Like he's still like I think there's probably some level of genuineness to it, but even if there's not, at least he's creating like a fun experience for everyone, and people are having a blast working with him. And he's being like cool on set, unless you break COVID protocol.
I was about to say, cut to him screaming at people.
Yeah.
We are the gold standard. You're back there in Hollywood making movies right now because of us. Because they believe in us and what we're doing. I'm on the phone with every studio at night. Insurance companies. Producers. And they're looking at us and using us to make their movies. We are creating thousands of jobs, you I don't ever want to see it again. Ever. And if you don't do it, you're fired. And I see you do it again, you're gone. And anyone on this crew does it. That's it. And you too, and you too, and you. Don't you ever do it again. That's it! No apologies. You can tell it to the people that are losing their homes because our industry is shut down. It's not going to put food on their table or pay for their college education. That's what I sleep with every night. In the future of this industry. So I'm sorry, I'm beyond your apologies. I have told you, and now I want it. And if you don't do it, you're out. We are not shutting this movie down. Is it understood? If I see it again, you're gone. And so are you. So you're going to cost him his job. And I see it on the set, you're gone. And you're gone. That's it. Am I clear? Do you understand what I want? Do you understand the responsibility that you have? Because I will deal with your reason. And if you can't be reasonable, and I can't deal with your logic, you're fired. That's it. That is it. I trust you guys to be here. That's it. That's it, guys.
And even that, right? So even like when he was screaming about that, it's like because of how he felt about like he's like we're trying to make these movies, we're trying to do this for an audience. You guys are screwing it up, right? So yeah, I don't know. I think like I kind of like that about him. I kind of like that he's like this invested in making these movies and it being like him being that intense about it.
Yeah. No, again, if it doesn't sound obvious, we are big fans of Tom Cruise. So, which is going to be upsetting when we talk about the movie, but we love Tom. So that brings us to, do you want to mention the other main cast members, just a few of them?
Well, I think we should, and especially let's talk about the other like the titular character. And before we get into who is cast, I just wanted to throw out, because I thought this was very strange, the other names that were considered. So a decision is made fairly early on in this one, and I think it's a good decision. If you want to try and kind of separate this in audiences' minds from the Brendan Fraser films, what's an easy, obvious way to do that? Well, let's have the mummy be a woman this time, right? A female mummy. And I think that's a cool choice.
Yeah.
What is strange is who they talk to, because the list I have in front of me of names that were in contention are Gwen Stefani, Jamie Chung, Lindsay Sterling, who is kind of more known as like a famous violinist and songwriter, and Brooke Shields.
Yeah.
Now that's a really wide range of ages, acting ability, and fame right there. Very bizarre. And that to me, like especially like the Gwen Stefani, Lindsay Sterling like part, that sounds like they were thinking of like stunt casting a little bit, right? Yeah. Like it was trying to like, who could we cast that will just be like oh wow, I can't believe they got that person. You know, that's what they're aiming for. But instead, we end up with Sofia Boutella. Chris, why don't you tell us a little bit about Sofia Boutella and why Kurtzman chooses her?
Yeah, so before this movie I mean, she's still obviously not even close to a household name, but she had kind of a 1-2 punch of being in Star Trek Beyond as kind of the love interest or heroine, if I remember correctly. But she was kind of covered in prosthetic makeup, and this kind of becomes her thing, moving to this movie. But she was also in Kingsman: The Secret Service, which is a great movie. I love the first one. The second one is dog shit, but the first one is awesome. And she's the chick with the knife, or like the sword legs.
The razor legs.
Yeah, the razor legs. And she's awesome.
She also has a very, I'm not going to get too pervy here, but she has a very memorable scene with Charlize Theron in Atomic Blonde.
Okay, I have not seen that. And now,
okay.
well,
there's not too much memorable about that film, but I'll just say that scene. It's pretty memorable.
But she has just a unique look to her, and Alex Kurtzman had this to say. If you look at her eyes, and this is what I got from watching Kingsman, there's a whole performance going on here. And in not saying anything but conveying that much to me, I thought, oh my God, no matter how much prosthetics we put on her, no matter how much CG we put on her face, if I see this, she's going to convey something very emotional to me. So we have somebody that Alex Kurtzman believes is going to have some presence on screen, and she does, and we will get into the film proper in a bit. But she's got a look to her, and I like the design of her, and in all, a good choice. In my opinion,
I would definitely say I'm a Sofia Boutella fan. I think obviously, as you said, she's beautiful. She just looks great on screen, and I really like. I don't know if you've seen the film Climax, Chris, the Gaspar Noé film.
Is that what happened during your Atomic Blonde?
But Climax is kind of like this strange, like Suspiria influenced dance movie. So it's like a strange like dance / horror film. That is just like about this one night where these dancers are kind of all working on this like dance routine, and then somebody spikes the punch with LSD, and the entire rest of the movie is just watching everybody go insane. And that is the movie, and it's like super intense, very, very crazy, and she is just fantastic in that. And you said, I think she's awesome in Kingsman, even as just like in this kind of silence. It's just, like you said, it's just about her presence. So yeah, I think this is actually a great casting choice.
Yep.
How it plays out is what we'll talk about.
Yep. Moving on to the love interest of the film, or I guess, again, secondary female character, Annabelle Wallis plays Jenny Halsey. I am not familiar with Annabelle Wallis up until, honestly, recently. This year, actually, she starred in the film Malignant, which is awesome and is horror schlock at its best, in my opinion. So she's great in that. But in this film, she was kind of an unknown to me. What about you?
Well, I mean, I'd say so. She was also in Annabelle,
right?
And then you've already forgotten this, she was also in King Arthur: Legend of the Sword. So we've talked about her before. I think we even mentioned that episode about how it's weird because like the movie for a brief moment seems like she's going to be important, and then nothing really happens with her character. I think in our episode we specifically talked about we couldn't figure out like why this character is even in the film.
Wow.
But no, I mostly at this point would have known her from Annabelle, and of course that starts her kind of like her connection with James Wan, right? So James Wan is also like one of those directors who likes to, if he gets along with someone, he'll use them again.
Another cinematic universe, by the way.
Yes, part of a more successul one.
Yeah, very successful.
One. Yes. I'm not a huge fan of Annabelle.
Sure.
She's just kind of. I mean, this is kind of getting into the review section, but she's kind of like a whatever character in this. I would say I certainly wasn't aware of Annabelle Wallis's like how talented she is until Malignant, and I think she's awesome in Malignant because she has the hard job of like seriously playing a role in a very ridiculous, knowingly stupid movie, and man, she leans into it, and I thought she was awesome in that. Yeah.
Now, what are your feelings on Jake Johnson?
I am not a fan of Jake Johnson. Now, I will say I quite liked him as Peter Parker in Into the Spider-Verse. So, like, I guess I can deal with him in, like, voice work. But I find him to be a generally aggravating screen presence. I'm not going to lie.
Yes.
I thought he was super annoying in Jurassic World. I didn't like him in that. I mean, anytime he kind of pops up in things, I just find him to be annoying. And I've always said, I know this is harsh, and we don't like to, like, criticize actors too much, but I've always just said, to me, he's like the poor man's Charlie Day. He's like lesser Charlie Day. And I think any like role you look at of Jake Johnson, I think Charlie Day could probably do better, including this one. I sometimes picture this movie with Charlie Day in this part, going for what they're trying to go for here, and I think it would be much funnier and more effective. So, and he ends up, as you just brought him up, because he kind of gets the sidekick role in this.
Yes.
Tom Cruise's like is a good little buddy in this. But yeah, I'm not a huge fan. I guess you agree.
Yeah, I just kind of not even a love-hate relationship, just more like a hate slash deal with it relationship, you know.
Yeah.
But like you said, aggravating is the word. And again, we don't like shitting on actors. You know, we sound mean right now, and I recognize that. But I tried watching his recently canceled cartoon show or animated show on Netflix. It was, I don't know, I can't remember what it was called, but it was like a basketball coach teacher movie show, and that was annoying. just he's like yelling all the time in everything, all the time. So anyway, Jake Johnson, if you're listening, we're not huge fans. Okay.
No.
The only other actor I want to mention here is actually set up, Trev, as another monster. His name is the great Russell Crowe. Mm-hmm. Not the monster, but that's his name. he plays Dr. Jekyll.
I mean, there's certainly a time in his career where I think many people would refer to Russell Crowe as a monster.
Yeah.
Do you remember those? Like, that's kind of strange to look back and how there was an entire like period where like Russell Crowe was just known as being such a huge asshole, right? And I feel like that's.
Oh yeah.
I feel like that's such a thing of the past in a way, right? You don't hear that talked about as much anymore. I don't know if he just like chilled out as he got older. I definitely think, as he started like not having, maybe just as he didn't have to work out anymore and just embraced his like inner fatness. He was just like, I'll just, whatever, I'm cool now.
That, and I think he's just been leaning into it in some of his roles. So it's now when you address something, it's not funny anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's not, I can't make fun of it anymore because he knows it. Like he's always acting angry all the time in his movies. So I'm like, all right, well, it's moot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he is cast in this as Dr. Henry Jekyll and Mr. Edward Hyde.
Yes.
That's everybody obviously knows the story of Jekyll and Hyde, and you might be thinking to yourself, what? Why is Jekyll and Hyde in a mummy movie? That's a great question. But he is meant to be kind of, as you just said, the kind of the bridge character who will connect all of these dark universe entries. So they're looking at him as like the Nick Fury type character. Quite specifically, actually, as we get into the story of the film.
Yeah. So before moving into the review of the movie, let's talk a little bit about the marketing. Right away here is usually when I drop the trailer, and I will. But the studio also dropped a trailer for the IMAX screenings. And, well, there was a little bit of an issue with it.
What the hell?
The issue being that there was only filled with some sound effects.
No!
And all the music was ripped out of it, and it was almost completely silent. Other than a few screams, grunts, shrieks, and squeals. And it was hilarious, and it took the internet by storm.
Yeah, and crazy enough, like it stayed up online for like way too long, right?
Yeah.
Like there was a clear like fuck up, and then it just stayed on like the IMAX YouTube page for like 6 days, giving the entire internet like plenty of time to just meme it to death and just like have so much fun with it, and it really was pretty embarrassing.
Yeah, big time. Trev, do you do a good Tom Cruise post-production trailer scream?
I'm gonna give it a whirl here. Here's my go at it. How's that one?
Okay, that was good. Okay, let me do mine.
Okay. Yeah, not bad, not bad. You went for the whole trifecta. I was just doing the last one there.
So yeah, this was hilarious. So if people were excited for The Mummy, well, I don't know if this was good or bad, actually.
I think it was definitely bad. I think this was in my memory, I think that was the beginning of kind of the really bad buzz for this film. I think people were fairly like, they didn't know what to make of this movie at first, and this entire dark universe thing. And I think a lot of people were just angry that a new Mummy movie was being made that wasn't a Brendan Fraser entry. I think that was kind of the initial like, well, yeah, but we really like that series and they're rebooting it. Like, why? But I think when this IMAX trailer dropped, it just gave everyone like an excuse to really lean into that anger and just like now really start shitting on this movie. And right away, you saw Universal having to like kind of, well, oh man, how do we recover from this? And that leads us to The Picture. Should we talk about The Picture?
Oh God. Yes, absolutely.
All right.
The infamous. If everybody go to our Twitter page at F2F Pod, it's our banner. It's been our banner since the beginning of this podcast. But it is hilarious. Take it away.
So kind of trying to recover from some of that bad buzz and try to get people excited for this movie and everything to follow this movie as they're planning at this point. So in May 2017, a Twitter account suddenly appears called @DarkUniverse. And its initial tweet says, "Witness the beginning of a hashtag Dark Universe," and it is accompanied by a photo of our Dark Universe stalwarts. So we have Russell Crowe and Tom Cruise, and then we also have and Sofia Boutella, of course. So we have the stars of The Mummy, but we also have the stars or the intended stars of two of the following films in the Dark Universe, the planned films at this point. Johnny Depp, who at that point was attached to play the Invisible Man,
and now has an invisible career.
Yes. This is a pre-cancellation Johnny Depp. And Javier Bardem, who is going to play Frankenstein's monster in Bill Condon's Bride of Frankenstein, reboot or whatever that he was going to do as the guy. I think that was supposed to be the next one to follow The Mummy at this point. They were also at this point kind of well publicized in talks with Angelina Jolie to play the bride, but I guess she wasn't locked in enough yet to appear in this photo. Now, you might look at this photo and think, something looks strange here. And that is because if your eyes work and you have any kind of concept of photography and just realistic proportions and things like that, you will realize that this is a bunch of actors who are not in the same room.
Not even remotely in the same room.
No, this is definitely like a photoshopped image of these 5 actors together. And so it's just like between the IMAX trailer screw up and then this, for how important this launch of the Dark Universe is, Universal just can't get this right. It's like a comedy of errors. They just keep fucking up. And again, like just the hubris of like coming out of the gate saying this is going to be a universe, and then this like stupid image that everyone is making fun of right away. It's just like, man, they can't get it right, and it just keeps adding and adding to the bad buzz for this movie.
And well, Trev, let's wrap up and get into it.
Taking my bit, okay.
This is November 4-0-9er-9er.
What the hell? Welcome to a new world of gods and monsters.
I saw her. She is real.
Please meet Princess Amunet. She will claim what she has been denied.
All right, my plot summary. Oh yeah, who wants to go first on their thoughts?
Man, I don't give a shit.
Okay, sounds good. Nick Morton is a soldier of fortune who plunders ancient sites for timeless artifacts and sells them to the highest bidder. When Nick and his partner come under attack in the Middle East, the ensuing battle accidentally unearths Amunet, a betrayed Egyptian princess who was entombed under the desert for thousands of years. With her powers constantly evolving, Morton must now stop the resurrected monster as she embarks on a furious rampage through the streets of London.
That's The Mummy. I mean, I guess, you know what? I guess I'll go first simply because I just watched it. Right?
Yeah,
I
literally, listeners, like what? Like you finished it, what, like an hour ago?
Yeah, like 40 minutes ago. And this was a second time watch for me, so I did see this in the theater. And I will say my opinion hasn't changed too much. In fact, this is, usually you and I like to kind of not tell each other our thoughts. Yeah. But this is one that's so recent, and we talked about it at the time, that I think we both remember how we felt about it. Mm-hmm. And I'd say I think we're kind of on the same page on this one. except that I know there's one element that we do disagree on, and maybe that'll be fairly interesting to talk about. But overall, I would just say that yeah, this is pretty disappointing. I'm not surprised it bombed. Now, I will come in. I'm often like, the voice of reason to a certain degree in this podcast, and I think too often in our social media dominated landscape, everyone like leans so hard into liking or disliking a movie that it just becomes all black and white and all absolutes.
Yes.
And so no one will acknowledge like that, a movie can just be kind of bland but not god awful. So when this movie came out, there's a lot of talk about how like, oh my God, this is the worst thing I've ever seen, right? And I'll say it's not that bad. And in fact, I actually timestamped this because I was curious for myself because I knew this is how I felt. This is an hour and 50-minute movie. I would say I'm actually pretty on board with this movie for the first 59 minutes or so. For like the first 59 minutes, I actually think it's pretty good. I remember watching the theater and like sitting there wondering like, wow, why all the bad reviews? Why aren't people liking this? This seems kind of fun. This isn't that bad. And there's a certain thing that happens at the 59-minute mark, we'll get into it, that completely derails the movie, and it never recovers. And that's the problem, is the entire back half is a shit show. And it's because of... The biggest problem with this movie is that it's not allowed to be The Mummy. It's Dark Universe Chapter 1. And that is such a bad decision, and it rides everything else. And it just stumbles out of the gate in trying to set up too much instead of just allowing it to be a singular movie that maybe would have been, entertaining and cool enough for us to just want to see more and naturally build this out the way the better shared universes do. So yeah, I'll get into more specifics, but yeah, it's just bland. That's the problem.
Yeah, my word is disappointing, which is the first word you actually said. I saw this opening weekend as well, actually in IMAX. At the time, a buddy of mine lives out of town. We decided he was coming into town, so we decided to have a nice guys' night with a few friends. And we were like, fuck, we haven't been to an IMAX movie in forever. So we spent the huge surcharge for an IMAX to go see The Mummy. And we just left bored, and very disappointed in what it is, because we are all such big fans of Tom Cruise. Obviously, the problem is the setup stuff, of course. I do think a lot of the problem on my end is actually Tom Cruise. He just seems like he shouldn't be in this movie, or at least written completely different.
See, this is where you and I are going to have like a slight disagreement. Yeah.
So we'll get into the specifics about that, but yeah, I just feel like this is just disappointed, and Sofia Boutella is wasted, I think, especially in the middle, especially around the 59-minute mark, and it's just kind of like a nothing burger of a movie that doesn't get me excited for more. It's one of those movies that I watched one time. Like I don't despise it like you're saying. Like I wasn't on the internet hate train, but it's just kind of like blah. Yeah.
No, I said it's the kind of movie that you have on in the background on like a Sunday afternoon because it's on cable.
Totally.
And you're like, yeah, I guess there's some decent stuff in here, but mostly it's just like, whatever. And you mentioned like 6 or 7 writers up top. This is very much one of those movies that just feels like a committee-driven movie. This is a again, no pun intended. This is a Frankenstein's monster of a movie. You can feel like all these various elements kind of stitched together, which all maybe could have worked singularly, but don't gel quite well here, and that's unfortunate because looking back in retrospect, I kind of would have liked the idea of the Dark Universe if they knew what the hell they were doing. I'm not sure I would like this superhero version of it, but yeah, that's the problem. Is you look at this and it's clear that they're just like, the universe, it's here now. Here it is. Here's all the pieces. And it's like, yeah, but I thought I was watching The Mummy. What happened to The Mummy? You just mentioned Sofia Boutella being wasted. She just like vanishes from this film for too much of it, so that it can instead set up all this like Dark Universe crap. And yeah, I don't know. It's just not the worst thing I've ever seen, but certainly not good, and certainly pox on the Stephen Sommers version. Yeah. I know people don't like Tomb of the Dragon Emperor, but come on, guys, let's compare the two.
Yeah. This is no Iron Man, which it was clearly going for, and throwing all their eggs in this basket was interesting to say the least. I like already that you're saying you're not totally opposed to the Dark Universe idea. Which I actually agree. I agree. I think there's something there to the prodigium thing. There's something there that I'm not necessarily against. and I do find interesting. But yeah, like it's just a hodgepodge of ideas coming at you every couple minutes, and it's just so bland, and it's dark. It's really dark. Like, did you find that this way? Like, especially watching it for the second time, I found like you can't even make out any of the action that's happening. It's just like really dark and gloomy, and there's some fun action to be had, like when Tom Cruise is like fighting zombie mummies, but it's you can barely see it, and that always drives me crazy in movies like this.
Yeah, I don't disagree. It's not. There's some like cool imagery. I like the moment where the mummy is like walking up to Tom Cruise in the woods. Like I think
that's cool.
like there's a lot of like great profile shots of Sofia Boutella that actually look really really cool. But overall, it's not like a super visually compelling film. Which again, it's a first. I keep calling him a first time director, but that's because the movie he did before this was like a little small drama,
right?
And then suddenly he's like thrust into blockbuster land. But I think it shows that Kurtzman's not necessarily a seasoned hand at directing blockbusters, because this just kind of has this generic look to it. So yeah, that's not helping. And so you were just mentioning the Prodigium thing and how there is potential there. Well, so here, and you mentioned Iron Man earlier. Here's the difference between this film and Iron Man. Nick Fury shows up in the post-credit scene of Iron Man. And then later that summer we had Incredible Hulk, and Tony Stark shows up at the very end of that movie. It's not like halfway through Iron Man, Nick Fury shows up and goes, "Let me talk to you about the Avengers for 30 minutes."
Yeah.
Right? Like, they gave you a great Iron Man film, they gave you an entertaining Hulk film, and then threw in these like little morsels where you said like, "Oh, I guess they could connect these." And that's the problem here, right? Is that what they should have done is they should have made a mummy film simply about Sofia Boutella's mummy, got you excited about that character, and just had a little taste of Prodigium, right? And then you do your Bride of Frankenstein movie, and same thing, right? You mix in just that little bit there. But this movie, literally at the 59-minute mark, as I said, grinds to a halt to just go, hey, forget the mummy stuff. Let's have Henry Jekyll now just give you exposition speech after exposition speech about what Prodigium is.
Stop it! Stop it! Stop! Stop! Stop it! Stop!
Fascinating.
And also, can I just quickly say, Prodigium, terrible name.
Yeah.
Like, if you want, like, a secret organization that's going to be the through line of your big franchise, you better pick one that people, like a general, dumb mainstream audience is going to remember, is going to know how to pronounce, and is going to know what it means.
Yeah. Monster Core.
Yeah, exactly. The anti-monster squad or something, right? But when you have like Jekyll like stop in the film to explain like, well, Prodigium, it's Latin for a warning to monsters. It's like, okay, great, but like no one's gonna remember that.
No.
So that's not helping things either.
So I got to ask you, we're talking about it right now, especially the setup stuff with Jekyll. You have to answer me this question, though. Who's your favorite Hyde, Mr. Hyde? This one or the one from Van Helsing? And you have to pick one.
Well, I'm going to go with this one, simply because it's not like a dumb, terrible CGI creation. It's Russell Crowe. And it's Russell Crowe having a good time, right?
Yeah.
I'm offering you a partnership. You, evil incarnate. Me, your good friend Eddie Hyde. Think about it.
Like, now, I don't think Jekyll and Hyde should have been in this film. I think you could have had Jekyll in this very briefly, as I said, in that kind of Nick Fury role. I really think they should have saved his first Mr. Hyde transformation for a later film.
Definitely.
Of course, they never would have got to that. But, I mean, it's one of those things. Like, that's what I mean. Like, that whole sequence ultimately serves no purpose in this, and it just feels shoehorned in to go, like, hey, look, this is what we're doing, right? All these monsters. And the fact that you have Jekyll and Hyde in this movie, and then you decide to have a sequence where Jekyll turns into Hyde, and you don't have Mr. Hyde and the mummy interact at all. Like, there's no scene with them. And so you're not even, like... You're selling the Dark Universe. You're selling this idea of all the monsters coming together. And you don't even have the two monsters in this movie interact. Like, what are you doing? This is what I mean. Like, they're just... They can't figure this out. They're screwing everything up right out of the gate. And that's a problem here. I think, like, Russell Crowe is having fun in this part. I like him. I think... The Mr. Hyde design is pretty boring. It's just like him with a little bit of makeup thrown on him. But performance-wise, he's pretty fun in that scene. But I just don't get why that scene's in the movie.
Yeah, I agree completely. Except for when he's like spouting off like, just the philosophical exposition nonsense. You know, like,
well, no, I was just talking
yeah.
about the Hyde scene in particular. Like,
Oh, okay, yeah.
That all the Jekyll stuff. Like I was saying, like all the Jekyll stuff is just boring. Like all the Prodigium explanation and introduction. That's where the movie dies for me. Like I genuinely. So let's talk about the first half, because I think
Sure.
for me the first half is actually a pretty decent like adventure / horror film. I think there are some fun sequences in this. We'll talk about the performances in a moment, which I know is a sticking point between the two of us. But I think just in general, as you mentioned, I think in the first half there are a couple decent action scenes. The plane crash, once the sound effects are actually in, and all the music is in, is actually pretty cool. It's a good sequence. I think on a PG-13 horror level, the first moment where Sophia Boutel's mummy kind of like resurrects and attacks a couple police officers underneath this like dark bridge and turns them into zombies actually is pretty striking. There's some iffy CGI, but I think it's a pretty decent like PG-13 horror moment. I really do quite like the sequence of Tom Cruise and Annabelle Wallis driving away from the zombies and like fighting them like in a church or getting away from them. I think that's a good action sequence. So I think there's a lot of stuff in here that's actually pretty fun. And then you get to the Prodigium stuff. So that's like going to be my constant sticking point here of like, I think the first half represents the Mummy movie I want to see. And I want to see like the second half of that movie, and I don't get it. Instead, It just becomes a completely different movie in the second half, and that's what's disappointing for me.
Yeah, I was about to say that you like when the movie called The Mummy is a mummy movie.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's very strange. I like that you mentioned the plane crash. I think that's very effective. That was always my high point of the movie, was how cool that was. Which is funny because Kurtzman planned to shoot the scene entirely with wires and a rotating set, but Tom Cruise was the one that says no. We're gonna do this with the vomit comet and parabolic flight to simulate everything. And it's funny that 64 takes they did of that scene, and tons of crew members got sick. Tons of it. So again, the dedication to the craft, Tom is the one to do it, and that scene is extremely effective. So he knows what he's talking about there.
Man, he got knocked around so much during that. Do you think he had to go to a chiropractor afterwards? Like Cairo, Egypt.
You don't have to explain it every time.
Oh, all right, okay, I'm just thinking. So yeah, there's some cool stuff in there. I guess let's talk about the Tom Cruise performance, because obviously I think that was at the time that was one of the most criticized things, and I know you kind of agreed with that criticism. And this is like you and I ultimately feel the same about the movie, but I think we do have a disagreement here. So let me just try to make my quick defense of this. All right, sure. I will say, and I felt this way again watching it today, that I actually kind of like Cruise in this. I think I get what people are saying about how, yes, maybe he's a little miscast, but I think he's having fun in this, and I actually find him to be pretty amusing. Now, the script isn't doing him any favors. I'm not saying the dialogue is genuinely funny, but I think when Tom Cruise made Edge of Tomorrow, it like unlocked something in him where that character is played as a little bit more buffoonish and cowardly than he'd ever played before. Mm-hmm. And I think he probably had a lot of fun with that, and also got pretty decent reviews on that. You know, that was a very well-received film critically, and I think people kind of took to that. They're like, oh, this is a different kind of hero for him. And I kind of like that he's doing that again in this. Now, this is not to say like another actor maybe wouldn't have been better suited for this, but I kind of like seeing Tom Cruise play goofier than normal. And you know, in a little bit, we're going to talk about... So I have to put a caveat on this statement, because in a little bit, we're going to talk about Tom Cruise's ego maybe being a problem for this film.
Yes.
But there's a certain like ego-free aspect to his performance here, in that... I mentioned this in the initial review I wrote of The Mummy. I think of all these stories about how actors like The Rock and Vin Diesel, they refuse to be allowed to lose a fight on screen, and they don't want to look weak, and they don't want to, get beat up in a movie. This entire movie is Tom Cruise getting the shit beat out of him and seeming like a completely out of his element buffoon.
What the hell?
And I think that's actually pretty fun. There's like, I just mentioned the sequence with the mummy like coming up to him in the woods, and there's a great moment there where he grabs a stick, and he's like walking up to her, and it's like played as it's going to be this badass film. You have Jenny saying like, "Kick her ass, Nick, kick her ass," and he walks up, and she just like hits him, and he goes flying like 50 feet into the air, and then lands. Then later during the climactic fight between them, it's a great moment. He just rushes at her at full speed. She just like bitch slaps him down to the ground, and it's like he never gets the upper hand in the fights. He's just constantly beat up. And I like that, and I think it's cool that he was willing to do that. I think it's cool that he allows himself to be played in this kind of like the schmuck kind of sense. And I think he is kind of charming and funny in this. So yeah, I just I can't really hate on his performance the same way other people do. Maybe it's just the Tom Cruise simp in me or whatever, but I think he's fun in this. I think the movie makes some terrible decisions with this character in the final moments, but for the most part, I didn't have a problem with him in this.
So like I don't necessarily disagree. I don't think it goes far enough with the buffoonery, like it does with Edge of Tomorrow. I think it's there to a point, but I think just the script sucks. So that's I think a big sticking point, because there's this whole idea that he needs to be redeemed for being a total asshole, but it's never really shown that he's a total asshole. Like, what, he sleeps with a girl, a day ago and hasn't called her? I mean, yeah, is he an asshole for doing that? Sure, but he doesn't need, like, a redemption arc that he has to save the world, you know what I mean?
He's a soldier of fortune. He's plundering
you don't see it,
ancient
though.
culture's treasures. Yeah, I know, I agree.
Right?
Like, by the way, how do you think he gets his payment for those treasures? Do you think it's cryptocurrency?
Oh, my God.
Like... The Mummy's Crypt.
You son of a bitch.
Go ahead. All
right, that was a good one, by the way. I can only picture you today while you were watching the movie, right? You had a little notepad.
No, this is off the top of my head. Buddy.
Yeah, you son of a bitch. But yeah, that's what I think. I think there's just this redemption angle that drives me crazy in the movie, because again, he's not buffoon enough, and he hasn't done anything like that bad to need redemption. So that just drives me crazy. Like, he should be a total prick. We should see him pillaging some crypts earlier. We should see this happen. Like, I understand I don't need to see everything, but this movie really is all tell no show when it comes to his character arc, and that I think bothers me.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think they could have pushed it further. I think there's a couple good moments there that do what you're saying. So I think one of them, and it's actually still like one of my favorite moments in the film, which there ain't many, but when him and Annabelle also are running out of the church, being chased by zombies. I love that he just like runs in a completely different direction, gets in the car, and starts driving off without her. And she calls him on it, right? She's like, "Were you going to leave me?" And he just was, right? He was just like so scared that he wasn't even thinking about her. So that's like a fun moment that you don't see in movies too often. And then you have that moment later where she's giving him, and this actually speaks to what you're talking about. Like they're hard selling what the script has not been doing very well. Right. Where she's like, well, you see yourself as a bad person, but I know there's a good man in there. And he's like, well, how do you know? And she says, well, on the plane, when the plane was crashing, you gave me the only parachute. And I like that he says, like, I thought there was another one.
Yeah.
like that's pretty funny. So like, yeah, I think the movie did need more moments like that for sure.
Yeah.
All right, so I mean, maybe we'll never fully agree on Cruise, but I think we would both agree that he's probably, either way, he's probably ultimately not his performance isn't ultimately the biggest problem with this. But let's talk about some of the other performances. Let's address, like we just mentioned before getting into the review, we talked about how neither of us are the biggest Jake Johnson fans. What do you think of the Jake Johnson story element in this, which is, of course, just a gigantic ripoff, or homage, we'll say homage to be nice, to American Werewolf in London, right? Like, it's just so clear. The being followed by your dead friend because you're now cursed, and your dead friend, rotting more and more. So Jake Johnson is killed in the plane crash. He's killed before the plane crash. Tom Cruise actually kills him because he gets bitten by a spider and gets possessed. I don't know, whatever.
Yeah, whatever.
So Tom Cruise has to kill him, but then he keeps showing back up as a rotting ghost to Tom Cruise. What did you think of this? Beyond it being an obvious ripoff of a better movie.
I think if it's a different actor, maybe I would have liked it more.
It's Imagine Charlie Day. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, because it's never really that funny, and
nope.
It feels awkward. Was that just me? Like, it feels awkward that Tom and Jake couldn't really play off each other that way.
These two guys do not have chemistry at all.
No.
For two guys that are supposed to be like these like buddies who have been through the shit together and have like, I've been on all these missions, they have just zero chemistry, I think.
And that's the problem. So in theory, I am okay with it, but this is just just doesn't gel.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but in theory, I like it. I mean, I liked it in American Werewolf in London.
Yeah, and guess what? That's a better movie. So
yes, exactly.
I also don't think Tom Cruise and Annabelle Wallis have very much chemistry either.
No.
I think these are two actors who we've seen do good work in other movies, but there's just no spark between them, and that's because you're trying to sell this idea of how at the beginning of the movie, we learned that he kind of slept with her just to get this map from her because he wants to find the treasure she's looking for and plunder it. So as you just said, he's trying to spend the rest of the movie kind of like making up for that, and she has to at first be kind of dismissive of him, but then start to fall for him. And I just never really buy that. This is one of those movies where you get to a certain point, and you just said like the movie tells you that now they like each other, but it doesn't naturally happen.
Well, nothing naturally happens. So let me point out two specific instances, okay? So, listeners, the plane goes down, everybody's killed, except for Jenny gets out. She parachutes out because Tom Cruise helps her. And then Tom dies, which supposedly. He's in a body bag, and I mean, somehow his body's intact, but like whatever. It's PG-13, so whatever. But he comes back to life. And we
should mention why, right? Should we set this up?
Sure, yeah. Go ahead.
So the reason Tom Cruise is like resurrected after this plane crash is that he is the one who kind of uncovers Amonette's crypt, right? They go down, and he basically, because he's a badass, he figures out the way to open the crypt before anyone else does. But that then marks him, right? He becomes Amonette's planned, the male host for Set, the Egyptian Lord of Death, who is kind of said in this film to also be, what we would call Satan or Lucifer. Mm-hmm. So Amonette wants to use Tom Cruise, wants to use Nick Morton as the human host. So he's now been cursed, but that means that he's protected by her, essentially. So this plane crash can't kill him because she needs the body. So they get in this plane crash, and then he wakes up in the morgue.
Right. And there is barely a reaction to him being alive.
Right.
It is so strange because the next scene of Nick being alive, he's with Jenny at a bar. Mm-hmm. Like, it's just like business as usual.
Yeah.
And they're having some drinks, and Nick's like talking about how he's still alive and all this other stuff. And Jenny is just staring at him blankly. Like, she should be fucking losing her mind at this point.
Although this is a moment that, again, has, I think, a pretty funny physical comedy from Tom Cruise. When she asks him, like, why are you still alive? And he's like holding up both shots. And he's just has this look on his face like, I don't know. It's crazy, isn't it? He's playing it well. She's not, right?
Exactly.
As you just said, she's playing it too, like kind of deadpan.
They're just not on the same page.
Yeah.
And then Jenny talks. So that's the first instance. So then Jenny starts to talk about, how she has a theory that they've angered the gods, that she's been, studying Amonette for years and years, and she like believes in this possession stuff and whatever. She believes in what's going on, right? Cut to them outside, and Nick is yelling at Jenny, being like, "It's happening! Like, she's alive. The mummy is alive, and I'm possessed, and shit's hitting the fan." And Jenny argues with him that he's crazy.
Yeah, I know.
Dude, I was like, what the fuck is going on? We just saw a scene where she's the one saying supernatural shit exists. Cut to Tom Cruise saying, hey, there's supernatural shit happening. And she's like, you need to go to a mental institute.
You work for an organization that is specifically looking for supernatural phenomena. You just saw a man raised from the dead after a plane crash. You just told him about how you're looking for this like cursed object that has to do with this evil Egyptian princess, and then you're like, yeah, but I mean, it can't actually be like a curse. Yeah, I agree. It's like, what? Like, it's very, very strange.
It is one of those whiplash moments in a movie that you're just like, huh? Like, you're almost like a cartoon character at that point. But that nails what you're saying, is that they both just don't have chemistry because they're not on the same page on the script level, on any level, and yeah, their relationship just does not work.
Yeah, it's weird because I feel like Tom Cruise is bringing the energy of where he's trying to make a movie more in line with like the Summers films a little bit, right? Like, he's playing this in kind of that same like slightly over the top cartoonish performance that Brendan Fraser was doing. And then I feel like Wallace is playing it as if it's a real horror movie.
Right.
And again, like, either of those might have worked, but you can't have the two actors doing different things. So that's the problem, is because Rachel Weisz matched Brendan Fraser's energy. That was the great thing, right? She also played it like very kind of charming and funny, and Annabelle Wallis isn't bringing that, and that's a problem. Yeah.
No. Now that we've talked about Nick Morton, Henry Jekyll, Jenny Halsey, and Sergeant Vale, you think we should probably talk about the woman of the hour that is in half of this movie? Maybe, sort of, not really. what the fuck
Wait,
happened?
who are you? Yeah, who are you talking about?
Yeah,
Who are you
exactly. What happened to Amenet?
Oh yeah, I forgot that the mummy was in the Mummy.
Now this we're really gonna hammer home Tom Cruise's control of this film because this is like what you said. Halfway through the movie, Prodigium takes over, and the Mummy leaves.
Yeah.
This is turning a horror film into a Cruise infomercial at this point.
Yes.
Because Sophia Boutell's character of Amenet gets chained up and dispatched of.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, it's so disappointing too because we should say up until this point, and just in general, I think you alluded to this earlier, but it's like they didn't know how good they had it because
Yeah.
Boutella looks awesome in this. Like her whole like mummy appearance is great. I think she's like it's a nice mix of like sexy and creepy, which is exactly what you want to look for. I would just say one of my other problems with the logic of this film is I think if Sophia Boutella gives you an invitation to be her like mate for eternity, you're gonna take that deal, even if it necessitates being possessed by Satan. I think you're probably gonna be like, yeah, that sounds pretty good, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can't buy like any guy being like, I gotta fight this. So she's like, she looks awesome. She has this really cool like kind of presence on screen, and then like Prodigium captures her halfway through. They chain her up, and you get about a 20-minute sequence where she's just chained up. They're pumping mercury into her. I didn't even really understand this idea that like mercury hurts her for some reason. Like whatever, they just had to come up with something, I guess.
Yeah.
And then even later when she like kind of gets out for the final climax, like the damage has been done a little bit, right? She's been undervalued as the villain because now we know instead this is all about this like larger thing. And as we said, like in the final moments, it becomes much more about what is happening to Tom Cruise's character. So yeah, Sophia Boutella unfortunately got really screwed over here. And I know, and this is where we're going to get into like the changes that happened during production. I know initially the plan was for Nick Morton and Amenet to kind of have equal screen time, and this to be a movie very much that focused on the mummy and shows Amenet kind of going off and interacting with modern day society. Some more sequences of her like in modern day London. Seeing the world. I don't know, maybe you could have shown her going to different places and like what that's like, maybe getting into current movies and music. What kind of music do you think she likes? I bet it's rap music.
Oh, God.
Anyways, but instead, I think, I don't know, what is there, like, there's like 6 scenes with her maybe? It's certainly not enough.
No, this is a textbook case of a movie star run amok because Tom Cruise was guaranteed contractually. Basically, I don't even want to say final cut, but it seemed that way because a dude hires more writers. Like we said, we've named off like 7. He hires a bunch of those guys. He hires editors. He beefs up his part.
I can just quickly write. I can quickly read this, Chris. So there's an article that Variety publishes in 2017, June 14th, 2017, called "Inside the Mummy's Troubles, Tom Cruise Had Excessive Control." There's an article by Ramin Saduda and Brent Lang. And so speaking to what you said, it says, Universal, according to sources familiar with the matter, contractually guaranteed Cruise control of most aspects of the project, from script approval to post-production decisions. He also had a great deal of input on the film's marketing and release strategy, these sources said. He's the one who advocated for a June debut in a prime summer period. So as you just said, he kind of comes in, he brings in his own writers, and they said basically even on set, he kind of, he approved Alex Kurtzman coming in. It says here, on the set of The Mummy, Cruise acted like the Top Gun he once was, calling all the shots. Kurtzman had been in the running to direct the project before Cruise signed on, but the actor gave his blessing for the filmmaker to slide behind the camera. They'd established a comfort level when Kurtzman worked as a screenwriter on Mission Impossible 3. But they say on set that ultimately everyone on set, in this exclusive, story here, talk about how, especially when it came to the big action sequences, Cruise was really the one dictating all of that. He was very much micromanaging the direction and the overall production. And one of the things he definitely changes in bringing in his writers is the Nick Morton character gets very, very beefed up and becomes more centralized. And Amenet kind of gets like left behind a little bit. And that's really too bad. Because I think, not to say that, obviously the Mummy was, Rick O'Connell's the character we really remember. But at least Imhotep is a genuinely like effective villain, as you're just saying, right?
Yeah.
Like there's enough of him in that that he was well liked enough that people wanted to see him back in The Mummy Returns, And I don't think you come away from this going like, boy, I can't wait to see the return of Amenet, because we just don't have enough of her in this. And so I think that was like a huge mistake to make a movie called The Mummy and be like, but this is obviously all about Nick Morton, right? Because like, no, it's not.
Well, again, he gets the arc as, shoestring together as it is. And can we just spoil the ending here? Sure. Do you want to? So we can just say, so basically Nick Morton becomes the Mummy.
Yeah.
Like he kills Amenet and he becomes the Mummy. And the rest of the film is leading off into the dark universe with him as the Mummy.
Yeah, with this like big question hovering over it of saying, oh, is he going to be like the hero or the villain of the franchise? But it's Tom Cruise. He's going to be a hero. We're not stupid. You know, that's the thing too. It's like, even like there's this obviously like ADR dialogue from Russell Crowe at the end to like set up where the franchise is going.
He is a monster now.
He is also still a man. A good man.
Perhaps. Yet he has only begun to discover his power. And we cannot know which side will win out. Between darkness and light. Good or evil. Whatever human part of him remains, will search the world over for a way to break the curse. To find a cure. Yet evil never rests. And it will call to him. Always.
Henry, he used his power to stop Amenet. You know more than anyone. He could be our greatest ally.
Perhaps. Sometimes it does take a monster to fight a monster.
And like, we know where the fucking franchise is going, okay? like this actually speaks to the credibility of Tom Cruise as a movie star. Right? Because you can't fool us. Like you just said, we're not stupid. The audience isn't stupid. No matter what age you are, you know that Tom Cruise is going to win. You know? So I have a very hard time even considering the fact that Tom Cruise might be the bad guy. There's just no way, no chance in hell that he would ever allow that to happen. And
this is Tom Cruise saying, look, I didn't get to play Van Helsing, and I really wanted to play Van Helsing. So I'll just turn Nick Morton into this universe's version of Van Helsing.
Exactly.
And it's a star-driven decision that ultimately cripples the Dark Universe right at the beginning, because people aren't coming to a new Universal Monster franchise excited about Nick Morton as our central character, right? Like, so right off the go, you're going like, wow, so this is the guy, right? Like, we have this hero, like this heroic mummy, like that's the idea. Like, no, Van Helsing should be the hero, or those heroes should kind of naturally develop throughout the course of the series. But I don't think anybody went into this going like, boy, I sure hope that Tom Cruise turns into a superhero mummy by the end of this.
No,
just a really bad call.
Like, I would have accepted that we find out later that Nick Morton is a long-lost relative of the Helsing family. You know what I mean? Like, I would accept that more than this. And that's dumb as shit already. I mean, it could be worse. He could be a Palpatine. So whatever. I don't know.
You know, like, honestly, this is probably pretty goofy, but I was even thinking, because there's just a couple like.
Actually, Jenny Halsey. That's her name, Annabelle Wallace. Jenny Halsey is actually Jenny Helsing. Oh shit.
Well, I was actually going to say, and I'm probably pushing this into somewhat level of stupidity here, but I think you'll be with me on this, Chris.
Okay.
I thought, because there's a couple brief little Easter eggs in this that actually reference back to the Stephen Sommers films. There's a moment where Jenny like hits a security guard with a book, and the book falls to the ground. And you realize it's the book from like the Mummy movie, the Stephen Sommers movie. If you look at it really quickly, right?
Yep.
And so I was thinking like, oh, what if at the end of this movie they revealed that Tom Cruise is like a descendant of Rick O'Connell, right?
Yeah. And
like, or even like kind of basically like, oh, like Prodigium is like the natural like kind of like. Because, you know, there's the whole thing in the movies where I can't remember what it's called, but we find out in The Mummy Returns that Rick O'Connell is part of this, like, ancient, like, order, or he's a descendant of this ancient order that's meant to, like, fight evil, right? Like, maybe that, like, turned into Prodigium, and it's always been Tom Cruise's destiny, right? So you could have actually connected this to the other series.
Totally.
And it would have worked fine, right? Because it's a different mummy. It wouldn't contradict anything from that series. They really should have done that. I think they should have made a better effort to connect this to the other series, just to like kind of win people over a little bit more. And it would have been very easy, and it would have gave you a better explanation for why Cruz like would like be a character to keep following, instead of saying, let's just turn him into Good Mummy. Like, no thanks.
Which is a fetish site that
don't look up Good Mummy. Trust me.
Trust me. Well, we're talking a lot of shit about Tom Cruise, as much as we can, because it's very hard for us to do. But Universal actually steps up to the plate and defends Tom Cruise. Mm-hmm. Of course. He's kind of their golden boy or golden man at this point for tons of shit. So, of course, they're going to come to his defense. They're here quoted saying, Tom approaches every project with a level of commitment and dedication that is unmatched by most working in our business today. He has been a true partner and creative collaborator, and his goal with any project he works on is to provide audiences with a truly cinematic movie-going experience. So it kind of goes back to what we were saying before, that the guy is dedicated. So I'm sure he had the best intentions.
Yeah, I don't even disagree with that in theory. And I do want to ask you, Chris, because I think this is an interesting question. So you and I are both huge fans of the Mission Impossible franchise.
Yes.
And that's a franchise, as we were just saying, we were just talking earlier about him being a super producer. That's a franchise that he clearly micromanages and does all the same shit we're talking about here, right? Like everything about coming in and probably making changes on the fly, like redeveloping the scripts. Kind of famously, one of the Mission Impossible films was very much like kind of invented as they went along, right? Like the script. I can't remember if that was part 4 or part 5. I think
it was
part 5, right?
Rogue Nation.
Yeah, Rogue Nation. They were just kind of like, they didn't really know what the MacGuffin was as they were making the movie, right? They're just like, we'll figure it out in editing, and they did, and it's incredible that the movie turned out the way it did.
Absolutely.
But that's like a series where he's always doing that. So why do you think it works so well in Mission Impossible and went so awry here? I have a thought, but I want to hear what your kind of take on it is.
I think it's Chris McQuarrie. I think Chris McQuarrie being the director and helmer of these later Mission Impossible movies, I think him and Tom Cruise are like best friends, and I think they have an incredible collaborative partnership, because that's the one thing, right? Like sometimes you get these superstars that are talented, right, but left to their own devices with a bunch of yes men, they can stray. Like classic case George Lucas. It's the George Lucas effect. A visionary that left to him and all a bunch of, like a Rick McCallum that says, yes, 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 whatever you want, George. We get the prequels. Now you have Tom Cruise kind of doing the same thing and calling all the shots. Well, if you have a Chris McQuarrie as his buddy collaborator, I think they respect each other enough to be able to say no and maybe steer the ship along. So I think in this film, Tom's missing a partner. That's how I would say.
You might be right. There might be something to that, because maybe that explains why you have why the Christopher McQuarrie movie Jack Reacher is awesome, and why the Edward Zwick movie Jack Reacher Never Go Back sucks.
Yes.
Right. Because maybe Cruise is pushing Zwick around a little bit more, even though they work together in Last Samurai and stuff. But yeah, you might be right. I think ultimately also my theory is just that he doesn't take that full control of Mission Impossible to the sense we're thinking of until a little later down the line, right? Like the first film was directed by Brian De Palma. Obviously I know Cruise produces the whole series, and it's his idea to bring in these big name directors at the beginning. But it's Brian De Palma, right? I'm sure Cruise is pretty deferential to him at the beginning. And then John Woo coming in was a big kind of get for them off, oh my God, this hot name coming out of the Hong Kong action scene. And it really is kind of more of a director-driven series at first. And then it becomes a Tom Cruise-driven series around the time of 3 and especially 4, right? So it's kind of like this kind of naturally happened with Mission Impossible. And now we all understand what that is, and it just works. The issue with him doing the same thing on The Mummy is that he's sabotaging an entire universe, right? Because Mission Impossible is all about Ethan Hunt. That's fine, we understand that. The Dark Universe was never set up to be, and nobody had an understanding of it being about Nick Morton. That's why him coming in and making this decision to beef up his part and make this all about him becoming this superhero character and downplaying Amunet as the villain. It's getting in the way of what Universal is trying to do with this universe from the very first film. So yeah, boy, yeah, it's just, like you said, we both love Tom Cruise, but he was just wrong here, right?
Yeah.
Like he was definitely his own worst enemy on this one.
Every once in a while, somebody whiffs, and I think this will be remembered, and even in my opinion, one of Tom Cruise's worst movies. And I think it's because it's just not as it's not as entertaining or interesting as even some of his lesser fare is. Do you know what I mean? Like we said, this thing is just kind of boring and a hodgepodge of ideas. And it sucks because, like, again, I don't hate this movie. It's just kind of soulless.
Yeah, it's not bad enough to hate, but it's certainly not good enough to love, right?
Yeah, not even close.
You know what? Actually, honestly, if I could just read a sentence from my original Letterboxd review, I was talking about how I called it a roller coaster of low lows and mid-range highs, and that's the thing. It's like, right, like the stuff that doesn't work is really aggravating and really bad, and the stuff that's good is only kind of good. And that's the issue. Is like I said, I do genuinely enjoy the first half, but the problem is you never like a movie that's only the first half is good, right?
Nope.
A first half has to be followed by an exciting climax, right? You want this movie to keep building, and this movie doesn't. This movie instead goes off the rails once Prodigium comes in and completely takes things over. So yeah, it's just not memorable. And I agree with you that it's probably not his worst movie technically. I'm sure he's made worse movies than this. But it's certainly one of his most forgettable and one of the most embarrassing marks on his career, because it is where his star power definitely got in the way, and you saw his ego like derail something that maybe could have had potential.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like that guy just doesn't make forgettable films, and this is its biggest issue. Is it's just I've already forgotten it,
Yeah.
So the Dark Universe obviously crashed and burned, dead on arrival right away. But we have a little bit of an industry insight here through a writer named Eric Hesserer. He's actually one of the writers on the Nightmare on Elm Street reboot from 2010, ? We actually did an episode on that, so definitely go look back into your podcast app and check that episode out. It's a lot of fun. But Eric Hesserer, I have a little thing I'm going to read here. He admitted that he knew the Dark Universe franchise was doomed from the start when he sat in on the first big planning session with several other heavyweight writers involved. Hesserer, who had been hired with John Spates to write a reboot of Van Helsing, said that there were a lot of voices and none of them could agree on much. They couldn't even decide if the monsters were heroes or villains. He said it was like watching all his relatives argue during Thanksgiving dinner. At the end, the attitude was basically that everyone involved would just make it up as they went along. He and Spates knew that some movies would never work, so they joked that they might as well write the most oddball screenplay they could think of, such as including characters that would just kill off the monsters from movies that didn't work, because they felt there was no way the franchise would survive long enough to actually produce their own film. Yeah, again, cart before horse stuff. Bringing in a committee of writers to be like, let's flesh out this universe, but not even flesh it out, just kind of just arguing about it. And this was actually recently attempted a few years back with the Transformers franchise. They got a bunch of writers together, like 10 or 15 writers, to try to flesh out a Transformers universe. And starting with Bumblebee or after Bumblebee, I'm not sure, but one day we might actually talk about Bumblebee. We'll see. And we'll get into that. But this is not the way to make a movie. This is
not the way to make a movie. It's certainly not the way to make an entire universe and shared kind of universe and all this.
Yeah, not at all. And again, the writing was on the wall. It's unfortunate that they spent so much goddamn money and effort on this, but Hollywood gonna Hollywood, obviously.
Well, and just hearing that quote where they said like they didn't even know if the monsters were the heroes or the villains, right? To go into
crazy.
All of this and like not have that idea set in stone. Right, because like I said, like, look, I'm not jacked about the idea of a dark universe where the monsters turn out to be like the heroes. I think that's like goofy. But like, if you go in with that as your plan, and you get writers like who know that that's the plan, that's the end game, it might work. I'm not opposed to it. I'm willing to give you that shot. But if you go in and say, I don't know, we'll figure that out later. Well, what are you doing? What are you doing here, Hollywood? Like the thing is, we've said this before, right? Everybody wants to be the MCU. And nobody has the patience and wants to take the time to develop it the way Feige and the MCU did. You look at how naturally they rolled that out and the patience they had, and everybody just DC did this as well, right? We just got to rush to it. We got to rush to our Justice League or whatever. It's like, no. Give us the Mummy, then give us Frankenstein, then give us Dracula, and then start mixing these things together. I don't know. I know I'm like just preaching the choir here, and the way people have these conversations so much, and the Dark Universe is like this infamous failure already. But it really does represent like the worst impulses of Hollywood, which is what this podcast is all about. So.
Yeah. Alex Kurtzman actually had an interview in 2019 saying, "The Mummy wasn't what I wanted it to be. I'm no longer involved in that and have no idea what's going on with it. I look back on it now, and what felt painful at the time ended up being an incredible blessing for me." And I
wonder what he means by that. I guess he means that because of its failure, it freed him up to go ruin Star Trek. So I know modern Star Trek has its fans. I'm not one of them. I'm not a fan of how Alex Kurtzman has turned Star Trek into kind of just another action kind of property, which I think is a bummer. But I'm not happy that he's like the current architect of that. I didn't talk enough in this podcast about how much Alex Kurtzman sucks. I know you love the Transformers films.
I wouldn't say I love the Transformers films, plural, but hold on before we get tweets.
And I don't think I've ever heard you argue that like why you like them is because of the strength of the screenplays.
Oh God,
like
no.
Kurtzman and Orci. These guys are, as you said, as I like to call them, they are hacks. They're clear hacks. Yeah. But I mean, it also just sounds like he never had a chance with this movie. Really, this was Cruise's show, not Kurtzman's. So maybe I have a slight, tiny, minuscule little bit of sympathy for him on this one, but ultimately not too much.
Right.
Oh, and Chris, I know we're winding down here, but before we go any further, I know all of our like longtime listeners will be just wondering, wait, where's Score Horror? Are you guys going to talk about Score Horror? I will say that Brian Tyler did the score, and this movie certainly has a score.
Does it?
I don't know. I think so. I see that it says music by Brian Tyler, so I'm guessing it does. I don't remember a damn thing about it, but yeah, there's your Score Horror. There's music, I assume. Don't remember much about it.
Okay, so Dark Universe is dead, but Universal announces plans in 2019 to go back to standalone features. You want to take it from there, Trev?
Yeah, so I think, look, to Universal's credit, the reaction to The Mummy and this entire Dark Universe experiment failing is like so embarrassing and so obvious that they respond the right way. Right, and they say like it would have been very easy for them to just like scrap the entire thing and be like, "Whoops, our bad." It also would have been easy to do what I believe other studios might have done and just plow ahead anyways, right, and still go right into the next couple of films and try to like hope people just kind of start going along with it.
Well, they want to get their ROI on that Photoshop, so yeah, of course.
Well, yeah, and honestly, like I am still to this day actually kind of sad we didn't get the Bill Condon Bride of Frankenstein, which I think had much more potential than this one did. Javier Bardem as Frankenstein's monster, that's genius casting. I think like I still want to see that. But instead they kind of take a step back and they decide to recalibrate and they say, okay, let's do the smart thing here. And let's instead take the Universal monsters and kind of give them over to Blumhouse. This Jason Blum sure knows what he's doing. Right. And so Jason Blum kind of looks at the properties and says, well, why don't we just kind of make these standalone director-driven films with a lower budget, so you're not putting as much pressure on them to be huge hits. And the first one they do is Lee Whannell's The Invisible Man in 2020, which is a huge hit, right? Critical hit, audiences love it, big success. It's great. I love that movie. It was one of my favorite movies of that year. Fantastic. And in the wake of that, we also see like other projects announced. Chris McKay has been announced to direct Renfield. We have like besides Renfield, we also have like two other Dracula properties in development. We have Chloe Zhao developing this like really strange sounding Dracula in space Western movie. Cool. And then we also have Karen Kusama developing a more kind of traditional Dracula adaptation, which will be set in modern day, she said. We have Paul Feig, who's been working for some time. I don't know if this is going forward anymore, but for a while he was attached to something called the Dark Army. He never talked too much about it. I assume based on the title and Paul Feig's kind of comments, I always had this idea that it was going to be kind of this like comedic Monster Mash kind of.
Was it gonna star funny women?
Maybe. I don't know. I had this thought just based on the title alone. I was wondering if it was going to be a movie about like the monsters being turned into like a military unit or something, right? Like the army capturing them and making them into like a Suicide Squad, which actually sounds kind of cool. Like I kind of like that as an idea. We mentioned this before. We have the Ryan Gosling Wolfman in development. By the way, if Ryan Gosling was in The Mummy, you'd call him Ryan Gosling.
Oh yeah, because Gauze.
Hello?
Yeah.
Gauze,
No, I got
Gauze,
that one.
yeah.
Okay, that took me a second. That was a really good one.
That's a bit of a thinker.
That was a thinking man's joke.
Yeah. But yeah, so I don't think there's any kind of thought being given right now to linking these things. It's instead just Universal acknowledging that we have all these properties, we have all these monsters. Let's just let smart filmmakers make lower budgeted films with them. And then who knows? Maybe at some point you can start linking them or whatever, but let that come along naturally if it's going to come along. So I think, you always look for the good in the bad. The good thing to come out of the failure of The Mummy is, to me, we're probably getting a more interesting direction for all this stuff. Assuming any of this stuff actually happens, right? So far, The Invisible Man is the only one to actually make it to screens. But I'm hoping some of these other ones actually do move forward.
Yep, I agree. Now, I gotta ask you though, if this was to keep going, like if this Dark Universe did pan out, like sometimes we ask this question at the end, what Nick Morton now is the Mummy, okay? Like what would you want? Like what do you want for the team up movie, for the Avengers? For what they would call it, Prodigium, right? Like that's probably what they would call it.
Oh, I mean, what a terrible movie title. Can you call it that? Honestly,
the Prodigium prophecy. Yeah, it would be terrible. But like, do they all team up to fight Dracula?
I mean, I assume to me that's where you ultimately have to head, right?
Right. Yeah.
I think if you're doing this Dark Universe thing, like Dracula's always going to be the big boy on the block, But the strange thing about this is that Nick Morton is possessed by the devil, right?
Oh yeah.
So
right.
to have your like hero be the devil fighting Dracula is pretty weird. But again, that's, as we said, it was a bad choice at the end of this film. I don't know. It's really hard. So here's the other problem with this ending of The Mummy is that what it sets up is it's very hard to figure out what you want to see next or where it could head next. Because honestly, I don't really understand where Nick Morton fits into any of this. We have that stupid voiceover from Crow at the end talking about how he might be our greatest ally or whatever. But like, is Nick Morton gonna have to show up in every movie, or do you hold off on him for a while? You asked me what I would want to see. I honestly, not much. I don't think.
Yeah.
That's the thing, is this doesn't get me excited about anything. I just I wanted to see Bill Condon's Bride of Frankenstein, but ultimately I kind of wish that could have just been completely independent of this, because so Bill Condon had directed Gods and Monsters, which was the biopic of James Whale, who directed Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein. So it seemed like a really inspired choice to let him come in and do that film. And as I said, I love the idea of Bardem as the monster and Angelina Jolie as the bride. That's also just like, that seems like no duh. Right?
Yeah, that's
that
perfect.
Seems like perfect. Yeah. But then to have it like, what if you did that movie and it's like going along, it's like, wow, what a great, cool Bride of Frankenstein movie. And then suddenly Nick Morton walks in with his like, his bandages on. He's like, hey guys, like, oh no. So I don't know. Like, I can't even, I know you want me to speculate here and have fun with this, but I'm just like, I'm dumbfounded. I don't know what you would do next. What about you? Have you given this any thought?
Not really, because it's been that hard. It is the worst part about going forward in the Dark Universe was how to incorporate Tom Cruise.
Yeah.
And I'm all for Tom Cruise in every movie all the time, but no, it completely just rips any enjoyment out of this whole plan. Because you're right. Is he the Nick Fury? Is he the Thanos? Like, what the fuck is he? What are the MacGuffins? What are we looking for? We need to find some sort of Infinity Stones. They'd probably incorporate something. Like, I don't know. It's a mystery, and I'm glad we're not going to see it. So
yeah, boy, they sure were in denial about this working.
That was your worst one.
I know, and it was it was the last one I had to get to, but so I was just like, I don't know, I'll just throw it in,
Well, Trev, let's stop ragging on this movie and move on to what's next for Failure to Franchise.
I don't get it.
Read a book.
Oh,
okay. But moving on from the Dark Universe. Trev, I don't know if I mentioned it to you or to the listeners, but I like to subscribe a little bit to the simulation theory. Have I ever told you about this?
What? No, I never. You never talked to me about this. I've never heard you bring this up.
Okay, so yeah.
Cut to Chris sending me 10 stupid coincidences every day that he thinks mean he's living in a simulation theory.
So yeah, so I've been spouting about the Matrix theory for about 4 years now. And wouldn't you know it, all of a sudden, the franchise, The Matrix, is literally being resurrected in December. So The Matrix works in mysterious ways, and this time it wants to make some money. So The Matrix Resurrections is coming out in a couple months here.
I think it's safe to say you and I are both excited for that film.
Extremely. So much so that I have not seen anything of the trailer, minus maybe one screen grab by accident, but I am on full fucking lockdown for that movie. I want to go into it completely blind. I could not be more excited for this one.
And I will only say to you, which I believe I said before, but as someone who does not go into lockdown quite like you, I will just say I watched the trailer and quite enjoyed it, and I think you would as well if you did watch it. So that's the good news for you.
Awesome. Okay, cool. But The Matrix is a huge successful franchise, but Lana Wachowski, the co-director of The Matrix, full director of Matrix Resurrections, had a couple of missteps along the way. So we are going to be looking at 2008's Speed Racer, followed by 2015's Jupiter Ascending. These are two very big budget, high concept films that crashed and burned, which we will get to. Oh, Speed Racer, crash and burned. Ha, there's one for you. Yeah, so we're gonna talk about Lana's career a little bit.
Well, Lana and Lily, right? Both Wachowskis in this case. Yeah, that's the thing about the Wachowskis is they are filmmakers who take big leaps. And that obviously sometimes you make that leap, and sometimes when you're taking leaps as big as the Wachowskis do, it's a far fall.
Yes, extremely.
So we'll be looking at some of their misfires here with Speed Racer and Jupiter Ascending. Not necessarily creative misfires. We'll talk about that as we go along.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly the movies that didn't pan out box office wise.
We may have a contender for the Fifth Element test. we haven't said
I hope
this
so, because Fifth Element test doesn't roll off the tongue the way the Dredd test did. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, the Dredd test is way better.
We just need a new movie that sounds a little bit better. Also, you know what? Screw the Fifth Element. For whatever reason, that's still one of our least popular episodes, which is just surprising to me. So
Yeah. So let's forget it.
Let's forget that. Let's go back to the Dredd test.
Yeah, the Dredd test was cool. Yeah, Dredd test. We should make shirts.
Dredd test.
I'll buy 2. Anyway, so follow along with us, please, on... I don't want to say please. It sounds like we're begging.
Please follow.
Go listen to Fifth Element. It's a good movie.
We had to watch The Mummy again. Come on, please follow.
All right, well, go follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, everywhere, at F2FPod. That's at F2, the number 2FPod. Check your podcast apps. There's links to our letterboxd and everything so you can keep up with us. Like us there, like us everywhere. Rate, review, whatever you do. A star rating would be sublime. And, join the tribe, hit that subscribe, because I just like doing this podcast with you, man. It's fun.
Yeah, no, it's fun. Yeah, and I really enjoyed this. I wouldn't say I enjoyed the Dark Universe very much, but I enjoyed our look back on it.
Yeah.
So I hope everyone's having a good time as we are, and hopefully probably a better time because maybe they're not watching the movies; they're just listening to us.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, we'll see you soon for the Wachowskis.
Cool.
Chris, going back to The Mummy for a second, I know you're like Mr. Rules guy with movies, right? You love your rules and you love your logic. Mm-hmm. How do you feel about the scene where the mummy creates that giant sandstorm and it's blowing so bad that like cars are flipping over and like flying down the street, but Tom Cruise and Annabelle Wallis are able to just easily run through it?
Have you seen Tom Cruise run?
This is true. I guess I should have just been happy that we got a traditional Tom Cruise run scene.
Yeah. Hashtag run, Tom, run.
I don't ever want to see it again!